We want deeds. We don't want any more words. We don't want any more apologies.
It has been a difficult time for our country, in particular, Black people in our country.
The question goes to Roger Goodell. When you say Black Lives Matter,
Black Lives Matter.
well, prove it. Prove it.
The stigma is still here today, whether or not you're working for IBM or Motorola or any Fortune 500 company. Could they lead?
When Doug Williams says that's the million-dollar question that owners are asking, can Black people lead? And I said, of course we can, but you got to give us an opportunity to lead. Everybody needs an opportunity. You had the first African Americans in the NFL in 1946, even before baseball. I said, well, can they play? First of all, the answer, of course they can play. Well, can we have more than 3 on a team? Well, yeah, of course you can. Well, can they play middle linebacker? Can they play free safety? Can they play thinking man? Well, of course they can. The idea of Black African Americans not being able to play quarterback it goes into a sort of historical dilemma for African Americans about not really being able to really participate in mainstream America. You know, quarterback is probably one of the most unique positions in team sports. Quarterback is considered to be you're smart, you're intelligent, all the qualities that Black males are not supposed to possess. That's what quarterback is supposed to be. Grace under pressure, courage, leadership skills, and all those qualities that historically Black men in this country are not supposed to have. It was and continues to be so difficult for African American quarterbacks to be accepted.
You're talking about supreme leadership when you play this position and people look up to you and people will follow you. Young kids are going to look at them and say, I can be a leader myself. It doesn't have to be in football, it doesn't have to be in sports. It could be in business, it could be in government, it could be in medicine, it could be in law. But I can be a leader because this guy is a leader now.
Even when you look at a guy like Pat Mahomes, and especially a guy like Lamar Jackson, if you listen closely, they're always being touted for their athletic skills. A lot of people would say, oh, well, look, we accept Pat Mahomes, but they're talking about how well he throws across his body and how he gets out of jams. But rarely will you hear people talk about Mahomes in terms of his great leadership ability and how quickly intellectually he can change course. The great challenge in all this is how do you change it? We've identified the problems. We've identified them for decades. So here it is in 2021. How do you change this? How do you change people's hearts? And I think that's the challenge of 2021.
I think we got to look at the climate in America today. It speaks for itself.
Sometimes a coach might feel a certain way, but he has to go along with what his head coach says or what his owner says or what his general manager says.
Where do head coaches come from? Do they come from the offensive side of the ball, or do they come from the defensive side of the ball? You look at the data and say, wow, most white coaches come from being offensive coordinators, and most of the offensive coordinators were quarterback coaches, and many of them were quarterbacks. As we began to see the Global Sport Institute come up with these great studies and now putting a statistical face on racism, now the ball moves to the court of the institutions and the teams. Will you pay attention to this and make changes? Well, that all goes historically. Well, they couldn't be quarterbacks, you know, so then they're not going to be quarterback coaches. They're not going to be offensive coordinators. So it's one of those things like the neck bone is connected to the hip bone. When you look at the numbers, it shows the dilemma and the paradox of being an African American trying to become a head coach. So they tell you, well, you know, son, you got to be an offensive coordinator, you know, and you got to be a quarterback coach. So you look at the numbers. Since 2002, 2003, 68 incoming offensive coordinators came directly from being quarterback coaches. Of those 68, 67 were white. Only one was black. How do I get to be the quarterback coach? And then they said, well, it helps to be a quarterback. Even today, you've got so many guys who are quarterbacks in college still being switched. So you switch to wide receiver. So you'll be a wide receiver coach or something. Another one, if you look at outgoing offensive coordinators from 2002-03 through 2019-2020 season, 38 of those offensive coordinators became head coaches in their next job. Of those 38, 35 were white and only 3 were black. Right now, almost the entire defense throughout the NFL is primarily made up of black players. So you would think that, okay, to the extent that there's a pipeline, you'll have a lot of black players becoming head coaches, from defensive coordinator to head coach. When you look at defensive coordinators and the immediately previously held position of new coaches coming in, the position that led to the most hires was linebacker coach, right? So you think, okay, a lot of black linebackers, a lot of black linebacker coaches. But the reality is that of the 60 coaches hired since 2002, 2003, 51 were white. Only 6 were black, 2 Latinos and 1 Arab American. So even in a position where blacks on the surface dominate, there's discrimination there. I guess that's the beauty of looking at statistics, because now it's not just people talking. How do you change people's hearts? Because a lot of owners still want to hire their friends and their friends' friends. A lot of coaches want to hire their friends. How do you change that? If I'm a black guy, how do I put myself in a position where I go to the Hamptons? Do I have to switch parties? What do I do to put myself in the flow where I'm going to rub elbows with these heavy hitters? Whether it's the head coach, whether it's the team president, how do I get into that flow so that this person will see me and see me not just as someone hired, but, oh yeah, this guy could be my son-in-law. Am I optimistic? Yes, I am optimistic. Just by nature, I'm optimistic about the NFL. I'm optimistic about the country. But optimism is not a passive sport. You gotta push and make things happen. And I think a lot of us discovered that about democracy these last 4 years. That democracy is something that you have to fight for. A lot of us sort of took it for granted. You wake up and it's democracy. 2020 will again be a year. You had a lot of people, because of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, these tragic deaths of African Americans at the hand of police and vigilantes. You had a lot of corporations stepping forward. We need black owners to promote black executives to the C-suite. We need black teams to start doing business with black vendors and to put more blacks on their board. Will your heart change? Will you, as an owner, a Jerry Jones or the Mara family, will your heart change? And I think that's where we are now. Yeah, we know Black Lives Matter, but prove it to us in terms of ceding power where in a way that means a lot to you, which is who you're doing business with, who are you putting in leadership positions on your team. And that's exactly where we are as we go into 2021. When you look at the evolution of black athletes and black athletes playing quarterback, 2020 represented a big step forward. And right now, the business of the NFL is flourishing. And a large part is flourishing because the product on the field is great. When we have more black head coaches, more black executives, more blacks in positions on your team, whether it's just more blacks or more women or more, just when you open it up, the product is just better. Open up opportunities and you will be rewarded. Do the right thing now so you don't have to apologize 50 years from now.
That first game, I went wild out there. It was always thought that the fans would have a backlash against black quarterbacks. That's why they wouldn't support a black man playing that position. The next game, there was thousands of people that came to the game. It proved that it wouldn't be a backlash from the fan standpoint. And the rest was history.